Gabriella Pierce had no idea her life would change the moment she sat down on that sun-warmed bench near the edge of the Halston Ridge golf course. She wasn't supposed to be there. Technically, it was private property. But after walking aimlessly for over an hour, her sneakers aching with every step and her tote bag slipping off her shoulder for the 5th time, she'd spotted the empty bench tucked beneath a wide tree and collapsed onto it. "I'm not trespassing if I'm just breathing," she muttered to herself, wiping her forehead with the sleeve of her thrift store denim jacket. She tilted her head back, letting the breeze wash over her face. The sky above was too perfect, too blue, and the grass too green for how messy her life felt inside. Her laptop had crashed that morning, taking her freelance design work with it. Rent was due in 5 days, and she hadn't heard back from any of the 5 interviews she'd gone to in the last 2 weeks. "Just one break. That's all I'm asking," she whispered into the wind. She didn't notice him at first. The steady rhythm of his shoes hitting the paved path was background noise, like the occasional whir of golf carts or distant laughter from well-dressed men swinging clubs. But when the pounding grew closer and louder, she turned her head and saw him tall, broad-shouldered, shirt clinging to his chest from sweat, but not in a gross way, more like something off a fitness magazine cover. His hair was dark, slightly damp, and his jaw was strong with a bit of stubble that made him look like he hadn't shaved that morning, but somehow still looked perfect. He was looking at her. Gabriella blinked. He slowed to a stop, wiping sweat from his brow with the bottom of his shirt, exposing a sculpted set of abs that made her look away way too fast. "You okay?" he asked, voice deep but friendly. "You lost or just hiding from the world?" Gabriella gave a tired smile. "Little bit of both," he laughed, and the sound was surprisingly warm. "Fair enough, mind if I sit?" She hesitated. "This is your property, isn't it?" "Technically the club's, but yeah, I guess you could say that." He sat down beside her anyway, stretching out his long legs with a sigh. "I'm Weston Pierce." Gabriella's brows lifted. "Gabriella Pierce," his head turned. "You're kidding," she shook her head. "Nope, I guess we're bench-sharing name twins." Weston grinned. "I guess we are." She didn't know it then, but Weston Pierce wasn't just a club member. He owned Halston Ridge and 10 other properties like it. CEO of Pierce Holdings, he was a business mogul with a net worth that would make Forbes editors drool. But in that moment, sitting next to her, he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who needed a pause just as badly as she did. "So what are you hiding from?" he asked, glancing sideways at her. Gabriella exhaled. "Freelancer problems, dead laptop, crashed projects, rent, life," he nodded slowly. "Sounds exhausting." "It is." They sat in silence for a moment, comfortable surprisingly. The kind of quiet that didn't ask for explanations or apologies. "You want to ride somewhere?" he offered casually, like he wasn't a stranger at all. She shook her head. "I'm just walking, thinking." "I get that," he said. Then after a pause, "You want coffee instead?" Gabriella turned her head and looked at him like he was insane. "I'm serious," Weston said, smiling. "I was heading back anyway. There's a cafe in the clubhouse, great views, better espresso, and I promise I'm not a serial killer." She laughed. "That's exactly what a serial killer would say." "Then it's a good thing I run this place. You can scream and everyone'll come running." She rolled her eyes but stood anyway. "Fine, 1 coffee. But if you try anything shady, I'm kicking you in the shin and running." "Fair," he said, leading her toward the path. The cafe was nothing like she expected. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto the golf course with white tablecloths and fresh flowers on every table. Waiters in pressed uniforms nodded respectfully at Weston. One even called him Mr. Pierce. Gabriella leaned in. "You're kind of a big deal here, aren't you?" He shrugged. "They just like my money." And just like that, the air shifted. Gabriella tilted her head. "Wait. Are you rich rich?" He hesitated for a breath, then said, "Yeah, how rich?" He sipped his espresso. "Billionaire, technically." She stared at him, stunned. "You're joking?" "Nope," she blinked. "And you just jog around and talk to random girls on benches?" Weston smiled. "Only when they look like they needed it." Gabriella opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't know how to respond to that. They ended up talking for over an hour, about everything. She told him about her art school dreams, the job hunt, the design gigs that barely paid. He told her about building his company, the pressure, the loneliness that came with it. It didn't feel like a first meeting. It felt like something else. Something slower and deeper. When she finally stood to leave, Weston stood too. "Come back tomorrow," he said, his voice quieter now. "Same bench, same time." Gabriella raised an eyebrow. "You want me to just sit there again?" "Yeah." He handed her a small white card. "And maybe call this number if your laptop can't be saved. I know a guy." She looked down at the card. "Pierce Holdings IT Services." "You're serious?" He met her eyes. "Always," she laughed, shaking her head. "Fine, I'll think about it." As she walked away, she turned once to glance back. Weston was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching her go. And though she didn't know it yet, that coffee, that bench, and that man jogging past was about to change everything. Gabriella didn't return to the bench the next day. She told herself it was because she had too much to do. Try a couple more job leads. Take her laptop to the tiny, overpriced repair shop around the corner from her apartment, and attempt to piece together a last-ditch portfolio from archived email attachments. But deep down, she knew the truth. She didn't want to be someone who expected things, especially not from men like Weston Pierce. But on the third day, she found herself walking the same path, the tote bag on her shoulder feeling heavier than usual. She told herself she just needed air, that it was coincidence. That it had nothing to do with the way he'd looked at her, or how he'd listened like her words weren't just background noise. She reached the bench. Empty, Gabriella sat, her heart doing something ridiculous in her chest. She hated that it mattered. A few minutes passed. Then footsteps approached, crisp, even-paced. "Not a jog this time. Thought you changed your mind," Weston said, coming into view wearing dark jeans and a navy jacket that made him look more like a magazine executive than a man who'd ever run a mile. "I did," she said, standing slowly. "Twice, and a third time brought you back. I guess I'm still figuring out what my mind wants," he nodded, eyes narrowing slightly like he was reading between the lines. "Hungry," she hesitated. "I'm not really dressed for anything fancy." "It's a sandwich, Gabriella." "Not a gala." He gestured past the trees to a sleek black car parked on the edge of the lot. Not a golf cart, not even a luxury SUV, something rarer, lower. She didn't know the model, but it looked like the kind of car that belonged on silent roads in the Alps, not a suburban golf course. She followed him wordlessly, sliding into the passenger seat and pretending not to flinch when the door closed with a whisper-soft click. The interior smelled like leather and something faintly oceanic, like expensive cologne. They didn't go far. Just 10 minutes down the road to a bistro tucked between two art galleries, a place she hadn't even noticed before. Inside, the walls were deep gray, hung with abstract pieces that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The hostess greeted Weston by name and led them to a corner table set with dark marble and crystal water glasses. Gabriella sat across from him, her palms resting on her knees to keep them from fidgeting. "Have you always lived here?" he asked as the waiter poured sparkling water into her glass. She nodded. "Born and raised on the East Side. My mom used to take the bus with me every Sunday to the library downtown. Those were the best days." "Your mom still around?" "No, cancer, 3 years ago." He didn't offer condolences. Just nodded once, like he understood that grief didn't always need words. "You have family?" she asked. "My sister. She lives in Paris. We used to be close before everything got so complicated." "What kind of complicated?" She didn't want the company. "I did." She said I chased ambition too hard. Maybe she was right. Gabriella tilted her head. "Do you think you did?" Weston ran his thumb along the edge of his glass. "I think I got good at winning things I wasn't sure I needed." The food arrived before she could respond. Grilled sourdough with roasted chicken and brie, served with a side of greens tossed in lemon vinaigrette. Gabriella took one bite and nearly moaned. She hadn't tasted anything this rich in weeks. "Okay," she said between mouthfuls. "This was definitely worth leaving my apartment for. I'll take that as a win." The conversation shifted. He asked about her work, what kind of design she liked, what her dream project would be. She told him about a branding campaign she'd once pitched for a local bakery that had fallen through when they ran out of funding. He asked thoughtful questions, not the kind people ask just to fill silence, but the kind that made her feel like her ideas could actually matter. When they left, he didn't drive her home. Instead, he pulled into a discreet underground garage beneath a tall glass building she'd never noticed before. The elevator that greeted them required a keycard. Weston pressed it against the sensor without a word. The doors opened into a penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline. Clean lines, dark wood, steel fixtures, art on the walls, some pieces abstract, others starkly minimalist. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum curated by someone who didn't live with mess. Gabriella stepped inside slowly. "This is where I live," Weston finished. "At least part of the time." She turned in a slow circle. "You don't have a couch that looks like it's been slept on, or a coffee table with rings from mugs. Do you even own a blanket?" He gave a rare, quiet laugh. "I have a few." "In the closet." She walked to the window, resting her hand against the cool glass. "Why bring me here?" "Because I didn't want to say this in a restaurant." She turned. "I want to invest in you," Weston said. "Not just your designs, you." Gabriella's mouth parted, but no sound came out. "I looked at your work," he continued. "You're better than half the people I've hired to rebrand my subsidiaries. You have vision, and you're wasting it chasing one-off gigs. You Googled me. I asked someone to find your portfolio. I don't do things halfway." She folded her arms. "So what? You want to buy me a studio, put me on payroll? I want to give you a space to create. Full freedom. You choose the client, the project. I cover the funding. You keep the rights." "Why?" "Because I don't want to be another man who sees your potential and uses it for his benefit. I want to be the one who helps you realize it for yourself." Gabriella's throat tightened. "That's not how the world works." "It can be," Weston said, "if we build it that way." She stared at him, her pulse thudding in her ears. "You don't even know me," she said finally. "I know enough." He stepped closer. "I know you see the world in color when others see grayscale. I know you're honest when it's inconvenient, and I know you're scared to trust me." She looked away. "I'm not asking you to," he added. "Not yet. I'm just asking you to let yourself want more." He handed her a card, not a business one this time, just an address, a studio space. He said nothing else. Gabriella took it, and for the first time in weeks, hope didn't feel like a luxury. It felt like the beginning of something she hadn't dared imagine. The first time Gabriella unlocked the door to the studio space Weston had given her, her hands trembled. It wasn't nerves. Not really. It was something more dangerous possibility. The space was in a converted industrial building on the edge of the arts district. Exposed beams, tall windows, concrete floors. But it had been transformed: new lighting, polished work tables, and an entire wall of shelving stocked with sketchpads, Pantone swatch books, and hardware she hadn't dared dream of affording. The kind of place real designers worked. She stood silently in the center of the room, the door clicking closed behind her, and pressed her fingertips to her lips. He hadn't bought her anything flashy. No gold-plated easels, no overdone furniture, just tools, space, respect. For the next week, she buried herself in work. Every morning she arrived with coffee and a list of ideas scrawled in the margins of an old notebook. By evening, her hair was in a bun held together with a pencil, and her laptop fan was whirring from overuse. She didn't see Weston, and he didn't check in, not once, until Friday. She was hunched over a mock-up for a boutique skincare line when she heard the door open behind her. She didn't turn. Her focus was locked on the screen, her fingers brushing the trackpad as she adjusted a line of typography. "You changed the font," Weston said, stepping inside. The other one felt too clinical. It needed softness. He glanced at the screen, then at her. "You're right, it's better." Gabriella leaned back, stretching her arms overhead. "You didn't come here to talk about fonts." "No," he said. "I came to ask if you'd have dinner with me." She looked at him carefully. "Dinner as in a meeting or not a meeting?" He held her gaze. "Not a meeting." She hesitated, then stood. "Then I need 30 minutes to change." His driver took them to a restaurant perched at the top of a high-rise downtown. The windows overlooked the city skyline at dusk, and the lighting inside was low, flickering from candles set in glass cubes. The hostess led them to a table near the edge of the room, the view stretching wide beneath them. Gabriella ran her fingers along the linen napkin. "This doesn't feel like a first date." Weston studied her. "What does it feel like?" "Like a test I didn't study for." He didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned forward. "I have no expectations, just curiosity." She met his eyes. "About what?" "What happens when someone who's always been underestimated finally has space to thrive?" Gabriella blinked, feeling unsteady. "You say things like that and then expect me to eat steak like a normal person." "Order the fish," Weston said. "It's lighter." She did. And they talked about things she hadn't even realized she missed talking about, not dreams, not goals. But things like whether art should challenge people or comfort them, whether silence in a room could be meaningful or just awkward, whether they ever truly saw themselves the way others did. "I used to think success would make me feel bigger," Weston said as dessert was cleared. "But it just made everything around me quieter." Gabriella sipped her wine. "You think that's loneliness?" "I think it's a kind of blindness. You stop noticing the details, the little things." "Like benches," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Exactly like benches." Later, in the car, neither of them spoke. The city lights flashed past the tinted windows, and Gabriella's fingers curled around the edge of her seat. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, but she didn't turn. When they reached her building, Weston exited the car first and held the door for her. She stepped out slowly, the air cooler now, the street quiet. He didn't move away. "I'm not used to this," she said softly. "Neither am I." His hand moved to her waist, tentative but certain. She didn't pull away. "I want to see what this becomes," he said. Gabriella looked up at him. "Even if it's messy, especially if it's messy." She leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't tentative, it wasn't shy. It was the kind of kiss that came after hours of unsaid things, of tension held back too long, of two people who had nothing to lose except the moment they were in. When she pulled back, her breath caught in her throat. "I don't want to be another project," she said. "Another thing you build and move on from." "You're not," Weston said. "You never were." She stepped back, her keys in her hand. "Then don't disappear." "I won't." She watched the car drive off until its taillights vanished around the corner. Inside her apartment, alone again, Gabriella didn't feel the usual weight of solitude. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was waiting for her life to begin. She felt like it already had, and she had no idea what came next, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. The invitation came 2 days later, a cream envelope hand-delivered to Gabriella's studio just before noon, bearing only her name in smooth, embossed letters. Inside, a single card, no logo, no branding, just an address and a time written in Weston's unmistakable handwriting. She stared at it for a long moment before setting it down beside her sketch pad. The address wasn't familiar, but the zip code was Upper Hillside, where homes sat behind security gates and hedges taller than her apartment building. That evening, the car that arrived wasn't Weston's usual sleek coupe, but a town car with blacked-out windows and a driver who greeted her by name. She didn't ask questions. When the car pulled in through wrought iron gates and up a winding drive, Gabriella felt her breath catch. The house wasn't a house, it was a statement. White stone, tall columns, lights glowing from windows that stretched 2 stories high. A manicured terrace overlooked the hills, and behind it, a glass-walled conservatory flickered with candlelight. The driver opened her door. Before she could step out, Weston appeared at the top of the stairs. He wore a tailored charcoal jacket, no tie, collar open just enough to feel disarming. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man who had made a decision and was waiting for her to make hers. "You came," he said as she approached. "I almost didn't, I know." Inside, it wasn't cold or cavernous the way she expected. The architecture was grand, but the rooms were warm, lit with soft lamps and curated with the kind of taste that didn't rely on price tags. Books lined the walls in the study, framed photographs, not stock art, not staged, hung in the hallway. A little girl and a younger Weston, both laughing in a field. His sister, maybe. A woman she didn't recognize standing beside an older man, smiling softly. "Is this your home?" she asked. "No," he said. It was my parents', I keep it, maintain it. I only come here sometimes. Why tonight? Because I needed to show you where I come from before I ask you something big. He led her through the conservatory, where a table had been set beneath a canopy of glass strung with tiny lights. Plates covered in silver cloches waited beside crystal glasses already filled. A string quartet played somewhere beyond the open glass doors, their music drifting in on the breeze. Gabriella stopped just inside. "This is not small." "No," Weston said. "It's not. Are you trying to intimidate me?" "I'm trying to set the stage." "For what?" He walked to the table, picked up a velvet box she hadn't noticed before, and opened it. Inside, a ring, not oversized, not flashy. A single stone, set in a band that caught the light in a quiet, deliberate way. Gabriella didn't move. "I'm not asking you to marry me tonight," Weston said. "I'm asking you to consider that I might someday soon, and when I do, I want you to already know the answer." She met his eyes, stunned. "This isn't how things work." "No," he said, "it's not, but nothing about us ever has. I'm still figuring my career out, and I want you to, on your terms. I don't want to be swallowed by your world. Then we build one that fits both of us." Gabriella stepped forward slowly. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." She looked down at the ring. "You didn't ask. I didn't want to pressure you, I just wanted you to know where I stand." He closed the box gently and set it down. "Walk with me?" he asked. She nodded, and they stepped out into the garden. Gravel crunched softly beneath their shoes. The air smelled of lavender and something citrusy. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the stones. They walked in silence for a moment before Gabriella spoke. "When I was 11, my mom and I used to walk past a bakery on the west side every Friday. We couldn't afford anything there, but she'd always say, 'One day you'll walk in and buy whatever you want, and you won't even check the price.'" Weston looked at her. "Have you?" "Not yet. Let me take you," he said quietly. "Not to buy it for you, just to see your face when you do." She stopped walking. "That's the thing, Weston, you always want to give, which is incredible, but sometimes I want to be the one who surprises you." He nodded once. "Then surprise me." She took his hand gently. "I'm not ready to say yes to forever, but I'm ready to say yes to tomorrow, and maybe the day after that." He didn't pull her closer. He didn't try to kiss her. He just stood there, holding her hand, the quiet between them richer than any declaration. "You changed everything for me," she said. "Not by giving me things, by believing I could do something bigger than just survive. You made me want more than just building an empire," Weston said. "You made me want someone to build it with." The quartet played something slow and lilting. The lights above them flickered gently. Weston turned toward her, offering his hand again, and this time she stepped into his arms. They danced beneath the stars, no audience, no expectations, just a girl who once sat on a bench and the man who saw her. And somewhere in the quiet rhythm of their steps, she realized she wasn't afraid of what came next, because whatever it was, they'd figure it out together. 3 months passed, the air had shifted. Summer had given way to the early touches of autumn, and with it came a kind of clarity that only time and effort could earn. Gabriella's studio was no longer just a space, it was her sanctuary. Her designs had evolved, sharpened by the freedom Weston had given her, but more than that, by her own decision to claim the life she'd once only dreamed of. Her name was now on the door, not Pierce Holdings, just hers. Gabriella Pierce Design. She hadn't taken Weston's money beyond the initial investment. They'd agreed on that. He'd opened a door, she had walked through it. Everything she built beyond that was hers alone. He never asked for updates or tried to steer her direction, but he was there. Always. Quietly, solidly, in ways that mattered more than any grand speech. One morning, as she was reviewing the final branding files for a sustainable fashion startup, a knock interrupted her rhythm. Before she could answer, Weston stepped in, holding a paper bag in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. "I come bearing croissants and scandal," he said, setting both on her desk. Gabriella arched an eyebrow. "What kind of scandal?" He slid the paper toward her. On the front page of the business section, a grainy photo showed the two of them leaving a gallery opening the weekend before. Her hand on his arm, his eyes on her. The headline read, Pierce's mysterious muse. Is the billionaire off the market? She stared at it, then looked up. Muse? That's what they're going with. I tried to suggest brilliant creative pioneer, but the press has no imagination. Gabriella laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Is this going to be a problem? For who? Weston leaned against the edge of her desk. The board already knows. My investors care more about returns than my relationship status. And your family, he hesitated. My sister called this morning. She wants to meet you. Gabriella blinked. In Paris. She's flying in next week. We're having dinner here. She insisted. She nodded slowly. Okay. What does she know about me? That you're the first person in years I care about enough to bring into my life. Gabriella stood, crossing to the window. What if she hates me? She won't. She's just cautious and a little too good at seeing through people. Gabriella turned toward him. And what exactly am I to her brother? Everything I never knew I needed. For a long moment the air between them stilled, then Weston stood and reached into his jacket. I wasn't planning to do this today, or like this. But I've learned something about plans around you. They never work the way I expect. He pulled out the velvet box again and set it on the windowsill beside her. No speeches, he said. Just a question. Gabriella looked down at the ring, then up at him. You already know the answer. I still want to hear it. She nodded. Yes, he took her hands, his voice low. Say it again. Yes, Weston, I'll marry you. This time when he kissed her, it wasn't tentative, it was sure. The kiss of a promise being made and meant. The wedding was small. Not because it had to be, but because they wanted it that way. A rooftop garden in the city, draped in soft lights and trailing ivy. Gabriella wore a simple silk gown that moved like water when she walked. Weston stood waiting in a dark navy suit, not corporate, not curated, just his. His sister, Madeline, stood beside him. She'd studied Gabriella for a long time during that first dinner, then leaned over and said, You're not what I expected. Thank God. Gabriella's voice didn't shake when she said her vows, neither did Weston's. They were words they'd both earned, through honesty and growth and the willingness to risk being truly seen. Afterward, they didn't fly to an island. Instead, they drove up the coast in a vintage convertible Weston had restored himself, stopping at roadside cafes and sleepy beach towns. No press. No assistants, just them. They bought pastries from a woman who didn't recognize them, walked barefoot in the surf, and fell asleep in a cliffside inn with the windows open and the ocean whispering through the dark. Back in the city, Gabriella's studio expanded. She took on 2 junior designers, both women who reminded her of herself a year ago, creative, hungry, overlooked. Her name began to appear in features and interviews, not as someone's partner, but as a force in her own right. Weston, for the first time in years, stepped back. He focused on a philanthropic branch he'd always meant to start, but never had the time for. They built it together, funding young artists and granting scholarships for underrepresented creatives. One night, months later, Gabriella came home to find the lights dimmed and the smell of rosemary and lemon in the air. Weston stood in the kitchen, an apron tied around his waist, stirring something in a copper pot. She dropped her bag and walked into his arms. You cooked. I attempted it. No promises? She leaned her head against his chest. I don't need promises, just this. He kissed the top of her head. Then this is yours, forever. They didn't need a mansion to feel rich. They didn't need headlines to feel seen. What they had was real, because they'd built it not in the span of a whirlwind week, but in every choice, every truth, every day that followed. And long after the noise faded, after the world moved on to newer stories and bigger names, Gabriella and Weston stayed exactly where they were, hand in hand, completely and unmistakably in love. They never sat on that bench again. They didn't need to. They had built their own place in the world, one where both of them belonged.